The engine roared. The cliff edge was 30 feet away. 20. 15. Steve McQueen's hands were steady on the wheel. His eyes were fixed on the drop ahead. A 1,000-foot plunge into the Hollywood Hills. Nothing but rocks and death below. The speedometer climbed. 100, 150, 170 miles per hour. In the passenger seat, Bruce Lee sat perfectly still, not gripping the dashboard, not reaching for the door, not saying a word. Just still. His eyes were locked on McQueen's face, studying him the way a predator studies prey. Or maybe the way prey studies a predator. The cliff was 10 feet away now. The wheels kicked up dust and gravel. The car shook. The Hollywood sign loomed in the distance like a silent witness to whatever was about to happen. Neither man blinked. And then, slowly, deliberately, Bruce Lee's hand moved to his belt, to the folding knife he always carried. The one he'd used in 100 fights on the streets of Hong Kong before Hollywood ever knew his name. The blade clicked open. The sound was quieter than the engine. Quieter than the wind rushing past the windows. But in that moment, in that car racing toward death, it was the loudest sound in the world. Steve McQueen heard it. His eyes flicked down for a fraction of a second, saw the blade, saw the absolute calm in Bruce Lee's face, the kind of calm that comes from complete certainty. And for the first time in his life, Steve McQueen, the man who'd survived reform school beatings, Marine Corps brutality, and Hollywood backstabbing without ever backing down from anyone, realized he'd made a catastrophic mistake. Because the man sitting next to him wasn't afraid of dying, he was afraid of nothing. And a man who fears nothing is the most dangerous thing in the world. 6 months earlier, Steve McQueen had walked into Bruce Lee's Kwun on Fountain Avenue in West Hollywood, January 1969. The place didn't look like much. A small storefront wedged between a dry cleaner and a liquor store. No sign, no advertising. Just a red door with a small brass plate. June Fan Gung Fu Institute, by appointment only. McQueen was the biggest movie star in the world. Bullitt had just made him a legend. That green Mustang. That car chase. That ice-cold stare. He was the king of cool, the highest-paid actor in Hollywood. And when he walked into a room, production stopped. But when he walked into Bruce Lee's Kwun, Lee barely looked at him. "I'm in the middle of a session," Lee said flatly, not stopping his demonstration with another student. "You can wait outside or come back." Nobody talked to Steve McQueen like that. Not producers. Not directors. Certainly not a Chinese martial arts instructor most of Hollywood had never heard of. But McQueen surprised everyone. He smiled. A real smile. "I'll wait." James Coburn had told him about Lee. Called him the most dangerous man I've ever met, and the most precise. McQueen didn't need martial arts. He'd been in street fights. He'd boxed in the Marines. He could handle himself. But what he needed, what he was always searching for, was control, not over others, over himself. Over the rage that lived inside him like a caged animal. The rage from being abandoned as a child, from reform school, from every time someone had called him trash. That rage had made him a star, but it was also eating him alive. When Lee's session ended, McQueen stayed. Watched as Lee demonstrated techniques, not flashy movie choreography, but brutal, efficient combat designed to end fights in seconds. Finger jabs to the eyes, elbow strikes to the throat, low kicks to the knee that would cripple an opponent before they knew they were in a fight. "You want to learn this?" Lee asked when they were alone. "Yeah." "Why?" McQueen took off his sunglasses, looked at Lee directly. His voice was quiet, almost vulnerable. "Because I'm tired of pretending." Lee studied him for a long moment. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Two men who'd fought their way up from nothing. Two men who'd been told they'd never be anything. Two men who carried wounds nobody else could see. Lee nodded once. "Tuesday, 6 a.m. Don't be late." The first lesson, Steve McQueen got destroyed. Lee hit him, not hard, but fast. A light jab to the chest so quick McQueen didn't see it coming. One moment, Lee was 6 feet away. The next, his fist was touching McQueen's sternum. "You're dead," Lee said calmly. "A real fight is over in 3 seconds. You just wasted 2 of them being surprised." McQueen's jaw tightened. The old anger flashed. "You want to try that again?" Lee smiled. Not friendly. Predatory. "Yes, and this time, defend yourself." McQueen threw a punch. Fast. The kind of punch that had dropped guys in bars from Tijuana to Tangiers. Lee wasn't there. He'd moved, impossibly fast, and now McQueen's arm was extended, off balance, vulnerable. Lee's hand rested lightly against his throat. Dead again. They went for 90 minutes. McQueen, the king of cool, the man who did his own stunts, who'd survived everything, got dismantled. Methodically, patiently, completely, but he didn't quit. That was the thing about Steve McQueen. You could beat him, humiliate him, break him down, but he never quit. "You're strong," Lee said at the end. "You're fast. You have good instincts. But you fight angry. Anger makes you stupid. And stupid gets you killed." McQueen nodded, drenched in sweat. "So teach me not to be stupid." Lee's expression softened slightly. "That's the only thing I can teach anyone. Everything else is just technique." Over the next 6 months, they trained 3 times a week. Early mornings before either of them went to their studios. The sessions were intense, transformative. But they were also something else, a collision of 2 massive egos. McQueen was Hollywood royalty. When he walked onto a set, production stopped. When he talked, people listened. He was used to being the most important person in any room. Bruce Lee didn't care about any of that. In the Queen, McQueen wasn't a star. He was a student. And Lee was a perfectionist who demanded absolute precision. If McQueen's stance was off by 2 inches, Lee corrected it. If his breathing was wrong, Lee stopped everything until he fixed it. For a man like Steve McQueen, who'd spent his entire life refusing to be controlled, this was both liberating and infuriating. They developed mutual respect. But respect and friendship aren't the same thing, especially between 2 men who'd spent their lives proving they were better than everyone said they were. Lee had his own demons. He was trying to break into Hollywood as an actor, not just a martial artist. But the roles weren't coming. The studios saw him as a teacher, a choreographer, a curiosity, not a leading man. The racism was subtle but suffocating. McQueen could have helped, could have made a phone call, opened a door. He had that kind of power. But he didn't. Maybe it was unconscious. Maybe it was the competitive instinct that made him sabotage other actors, scenes to keep focus on himself. Maybe he saw Lee's ambition and felt threatened. Or maybe Steve McQueen had learned early in life that helping people made you vulnerable, and vulnerability was dangerous. Bruce Lee noticed the silence, the lack of support, and something in their dynamic shifted. The training continued, but underneath it, tension was building. Not explosive, quiet. The kind that waits. June 1969. Tuesday morning. After their session, McQueen said 5 words, "Let's go for a drive." His Porsche 911 was parked outside. Silver, immaculate, the kind of machine that made grown men weep. Lee looked at the car, then at McQueen. There was something in McQueen's voice, something off. Where? Does it matter? Lee's eyes narrowed slightly. All right, let's go. They drove in silence up through Laurel Canyon, the Porsche growling through curves. McQueen drove fast. He always drove fast, but controlled. Precise. Every gear shift, every brake point, perfect. They climbed higher into the Hollywood Hills, past mansions where producers and directors lived in insulated luxury. The road narrowed, The drop-offs got steeper. Still, neither man spoke. Bruce Lee sat with his hands resting lightly on his thighs, posture relaxed, breathing steady. But his awareness was total. He could feel the shift in McQueen's energy, the tightness in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set. Something was coming. The road dead-ended at a turnout, a dirt clearing overlooking the entire Los Angeles basin. On a clear day, you could see to the ocean. Today, there was haze, the city disappearing into smog and distance. McQueen didn't stop at the turnout. He kept driving, slowly now, deliberately, toward the edge where dirt gave way to nothing. "What are you doing?" Lee's voice was calm. A question, not an accusation. McQueen didn't answer. His foot pressed down on the accelerator. 15 feet from the edge. 10 feet. "Steve." Nothing. 5 feet. Bruce Lee's hand moved. Not to the door, not to the dashboard. To his belt. To the folding knife he'd carried since he was 15, fighting in Hong Kong alleys. A weapon he'd used more times than he'd ever told anyone. The blade clicked open. McQueen's eyes flicked down, saw the knife, saw Lee's face, completely calm, completely ready. And in that moment, Steve McQueen understood something fundamental. Bruce Lee wasn't bluffing. He wasn't posturing. If this car went over the edge, Lee wasn't going with it. He would do whatever it took to survive, including killing the driver. The realization hit like cold water. I miscalculated. McQueen had wanted to see fear, to prove something, to establish dominance the way he'd been doing his whole life, through intimidation, through risk, through making people blink first. But Bruce Lee didn't blink, ever. McQueen's foot moved to the brake. The car stopped, 3 feet from the edge, close enough that the front wheels kicked pebbles into the void. Silence. The engine idled. The city spread out below, oblivious. 2 men sat in a $15,000 sports car, one holding a knife, neither moving. "You finished?" Lee's voice was perfectly level. McQueen stared straight ahead. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, not from fear. Steve McQueen didn't do fear, but from something else, something he couldn't name. "Yeah, I'm finished." Lee folded the knife, put it away, opened the door and stepped out. He walked to the edge, looked out over Los Angeles, the city that had promised him everything and given him almost nothing. McQueen got out too, stood beside him, not too close, maintaining distance. "Why?" Lee asked. Not angry, just curious. McQueen took a breath. "Because I wanted to see if you'd break." "And?" "You didn't." Lee turned to face him. "You want to know what I see when I look at you, Steve? I see a man who's so afraid of being weak that he has to prove his strength every single day. To everyone. Including himself. Especially himself." The words hit harder than any punch Lee had thrown in 6 months. "You're the biggest star in the world. You have everything. Money, fame, power. But you're still that kid in reform school, fighting to prove you're not trash." McQueen's jaw worked. His eyes stayed on the horizon. "The difference between us is that I already know who I am. I don't need to prove anything. Not to you, not to Hollywood, not to anyone." Lee held his gaze. "You want to know the real secret? It's not about fighting. It's about not needing to fight. Real strength is when you can destroy someone, and you choose not to." He started walking back toward the road, then stopped. "Tuesday morning, 6 a.m. Don't be late." Then he was gone. McQueen stood alone at the edge of that cliff for 20 minutes. Processing. His whole life had been about control, about never letting anyone have power over him, about being the coolest, the toughest, the most untouchable. And in 3 minutes, Bruce Lee had shown him something he'd never understood. Control isn't about dominating others. It's about mastering yourself. He showed up Tuesday at 5:55 a.m. every Tuesday after that for 2 years, until Bruce Lee moved to Hong Kong to make the films that would change martial arts cinema forever. They never talked about the cliff, never mentioned the knife. But something had changed. The competition was still there. Neither man could turn that off. But underneath was something deeper, mutual recognition. Two men who'd been told they were nothing, who'd fought their way to the top through sheer will, who carried wounds no one else could see. They understood each other in ways no one else could. When Bruce Lee died suddenly in 1973 at 32, Steve McQueen didn't attend the funeral. He couldn't. The grief was too private, too complicated. Instead, he drove back to that cliff, stood at the edge where he'd once tried to prove dominance, and instead learned humility. He pulled out the folding knife Lee had given him after their final session. On the handle, engraved in Chinese characters, "Be water." Water doesn't fight, it flows, it adapts. It's soft enough to drink and powerful enough to carve canyons. It's the strongest thing in the world because it never tries to be strong. He stood there until sunset, holding that knife, thinking about a friendship that was never quite a friendship. A rivalry that was never quite a rivalry. A moment on a cliff that changed everything. This story isn't about cars or cliffs or knives. It's about two kinds of strength. There's the strength Steve McQueen showed his whole life. The strength to survive, to fight, to never back down, to prove yourself over and over. And then there's the strength Bruce Lee taught, the strength to not need to prove anything. The strength that comes from being so complete in yourself that intimidation becomes irrelevant. Most people live like Steve McQueen in that car, accelerating toward the edge, trying to make others blink first, measuring their worth by who they can dominate. But real power looks like Bruce Lee with that knife. Calm, centered, ready for anything, hoping for nothing. Two legends. One cliff. One moment of truth. Steve McQueen learned that being the coolest guy in the room means nothing if you're not at peace with yourself. Bruce Lee proved that the most dangerous people are the ones who have nothing to prove. And both men showed us that strength without wisdom is just violence waiting to happen. If this story made you see these legends differently, if it reminded you that even icons are human, wrestling with ego and fear and the constant need to prove themselves, then subscribe. Because every week, we're uncovering the untold moments behind the myths, the real encounters, the silent battles, the confrontations that revealed who these people actually were when nobody else was watching. Hit that subscribe button. These stories deserve to be told.